Kahleb's disappearance was brought to light after a wreck with his immediate family members on December 8th. His father, Stephen, behind the wheel, driving twice the speed limit, according to the crash report. The pickup truck reportedly left the road and hit a tree. As a result, he and Kahleb's 2-year-old sister were killed. Kahleb's mother was flown to UAB. Aaliyah says none of them were wearing seatbelts.
Riley Denise Collins was born on April 12, 2022 in Birmingham, Alabama, to her parents Stephen Bradley Collins and Wendy Pamela Bailey. Riley was a loving and happy baby. She enjoyed fishing with her pawpaw Johnny and watching the show Paw Patrol. She also loved Mickey and Minnie Mouse. A year after Riley was born, sometime in 2023, her younger brother Kahleb Rowan Collins would come into the world. Though sadly, not much is known about him, as his mother and father, Stephen and Wendy, never made any mention of the little boy on their social media accounts, rarely ever posting any pictures of him. This was the only one I found, and as you can see, the little boy's face is barely visible, though from what you can see, he looks to have cuts and bruises on him. So on December 8th, 2024, around 10:30 in the morning, Riley and Kahleb's father, 40-year-old Stephen Collins, was driving his Toyota Tacoma at excessive speeds when he crashed into a tree on Fayette County 73 in Fayette County, Alabama. He had been driving at least 92 miles an hour on the 45-mile-an-hour speed limit road when he tried to navigate a curve on the wet road and lost control, crashing into a tree. In the car with him was his fiancée and mother of his children, 22-year-old Wendy Bailey, along with their daughter Riley. None of them had been wearing their seatbelts, and there wasn't any skid marks found at the scene, like Stephen hadn't even tried to apply his brakes to prevent him from crashing. Stephen had been killed in the wreck, and 2-year-old Riley would also be pronounced dead at the scene. She hadn't been in a car seat, and she had been partially ejected from the vehicle. The girl's mother, Wendy, was the only survivor of the crash, and she was transported to a local hospital for treatment. Following this incident, an out-of-state family member informed law enforcement that the couple actually had another child, Kahleb, and they wanted to know where he was because he hadn't been in the vehicle at the time. As such, the Fayetteville County Sheriff's Office issued a missing child alert. They also issued a press release in which they stated that the 1-year-old who was from Winfield, Alabama, was missing. They then asked the public for any information in regards to his possible whereabouts. Kahleb was described as a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes. He is 2 feet 6 inches tall and weighs 35 pounds. Though he was only a little over a year old, so I seriously doubt he actually did weigh that much. Investigators would then carry out multiple searches on the family's home that was located on Highway 129 in the Winfield area, as well as travel to Birmingham several times to interview the children's mother, Wendy, while she was in the hospital. Come to find out, the Alabama Department of Human Resources had been involved with the family. It said that both Kahleb and Riley had at one point been placed in foster care, and had even been living with a very nice foster family as well. Once the children had been returned to their own family, they were placed into the legal custody of their 55-year-old grandfather, John Elton Bailey, who also then began living in the home. So since the grandfather clearly had not taken his responsibility of protecting the children seriously enough, he was arrested and charged with failure to report a missing child. He was then held on a $100,000 bond. According to John, the baby boy had last been seen on September 4th, over 3 months prior to the car crash. Now it's been said by John Bailey's other daughter, Wendy's sister, that John had been kept from communicating with the rest of the family while he lived with Stephen and Wendy. The sister also made the claim that John had been kept boozed up by Stephen and Wendy at all times, which makes me wonder why Child Protective Services saw him as a good option as a guardian. A neighbor of the family also reported that at the time of the crash, John had shown up to the scene. And when he did, the first thing he tried to do was grab Wendy's purse. I'm guessing so that he could take her cell phone before police got to it. Now, the children's mother, Wendy, would end up making a full recovery. And just weeks after the crash, on December 30th, she was released from the hospital. But at this time, she was not free to go, and instead, she was transported to the Fayette County Jail, where she was charged in connection to both of her children's deaths. She is now accused of causing her daughter Riley's death, as well as failing to report the abuse of her son Kahleb. This was because the mother had acknowledged that she was aware of and had failed to intervene on more than 2 occasions when her son Kahleb was being physically abused by torturous means. Months prior to the vehicle crash, back in July of 2024, Wendy had received a text message from her fiancé Stephen while she was at work. The message said that he was going to kill little Kahleb. This was followed by a picture of Kahleb hanging by a rope with blood on his body. Then there was another photo that Stephen sent to Wendy after that. This one was of Kahleb lying face up on the floor, and he had extreme bruising on his body. Stephen then sent a message saying, "He won't move, I'm sorry." But then he sent another text message telling her that Kahleb was now moving. To which Wendy replied back, stating that the little boy just looked worn out and tired and hurt. And hopefully that's all. The mother additionally told investigators that around the time that her son Kahleb had died, which was, as she approximated, close to September 29th, the boy's body had been placed into a plastic bag, then stored in an outside building for a brief period of time before it was disposed of in an unknown location. Investigators have since searched a shed that was on the family's property, as well as the fire pit in their backyard. But even after multiple searches of the property and the surrounding areas, police have still not been able to locate Kahleb's body. Wendy is still currently sitting in jail, and she's been charged with domestic violence, corpse abuse, aggravated child abuse, and criminally negligent homicide in relation to her daughter Riley's death. Investigators have also said that more charges are possible. Speaking of Wendy, it's been said by multiple people that know her that she's low functioning and has learning disabilities. Not that that's an excuse for what she did in any way. Even though the last time Kahleb was said to have been seen alive by his grandfather was on September 4th, there was an odd post made by his father Stephen, or as he goes by on one of his social media profiles, Brad Collins. He made this post on November 6th, and it stated, "Our son is not doing well. He is not growing and has major back issues. His organs are growing but not his body. He has to have surgery at some point. Keep him in your prayers. Been rough and just seems going to be a long, rough road ahead of us." The thing is, Stephen made this post on a brand new social media profile, one of his many. And all the other posts that he had made on this profile were not public. This was the only one. Not to mention, this post was made over a month after Kahleb was presumed to be dead. So it looks like he was likely just trying to stage some sort of cover-up for his son's disappearance/murder. According to a neighbor, Stephen and Wendy had informed them that Kahleb was recently sick and he had gone to stay at a relative's home. Though this neighbor only knew of Kahleb's existence and had actually never even seen the little boy himself. Other family members of the children have said that they were completely estranged from Stephen and Wendy, and they didn't even know that Wendy was pregnant with Kahleb when she was. The few that did know had no idea if Kahleb was even a boy or a girl, because Wendy and Stephen had made completely different Facebook profiles with different names and had no pictures of him.
Lou Lynn grew up with and is the cousin of the missing one-year-old's now deceased father. She says the family is in a constant state of mourning as new information surrounding the loss of her cousin and his missing child continues to come out.
Because as mad as everyone is, and I'm mad too about what happened, that doesn't take away the pain and the hurt. It's just a really sad situation, and just horrific just to think about what kids went through. Does it bring me peace of mind that Pam's been arrested? I wouldn't say peace of mind so much. I want justice for Kahleb and for Riley. I won't say shocked. I had been hopeful that outcome was going to be different. If Kahleb's no longer with us, then where are his remains? What happened?
Rumor has it that Stephen might have thought that Kahleb was not his son, which may have been the reason why he was hurting him and not his older sister Riley, as she was said to have not suffered the same abuse as her brother did. Some people have speculated that maybe Riley was already dead prior to the car crash, and it was just a way of her parents covering up the fact that they had also already killed her. However, police have confirmed that the little girl was indeed alive prior to the accident. It's also been said online that Wendy worked at a landfill up until September of 2024. Then she began working at the courthouse. After that, it said that she still went to the landfill about 2 to 3 days a week to collect money and do paperwork. This has left many to speculate that Kahleb's body is possibly in the landfill, though I haven't heard any word as to whether or not authorities have looked into this lead. Those who worked with Wendy at the landfill also said that she would often come into work with bruising on her body, but they didn't want to pry. As of right now, Wendy still remains in jail, and Kahleb's body has yet to be found. Anyone with information related to the case or Kahleb's whereabouts is encouraged to call the Fayette Sheriff's Office at 205-932-3205. Little Riley's funeral was held on Sunday, December 15, 2024, at the Chapel of the Riser and Son Funeral Home in Columbia, Louisiana. She was then buried at Fellowship Cemetery, also in Columbia.
Criminal and a monster and all that, and especially, but I'm about to make you a hero. This Bella Vista and all that, because he's going to solve this case for you.
Maurice, or Isaiah as he was called, Torres was born on July 3, 2008 to his parents Mauricio and Kathy Torres. Isaiah had 10 other siblings, including his twin sister. He was a fun and loving little boy who loved to help out others. His favorite color was orange. He loved Spider-Man and the movie Toy Story. He also wanted to be a police officer when he grew up, and his favorite foods were chicken and macaroni and cheese. Isaiah additionally loved wearing hats, singing, dancing, and telling knock-knock jokes. Little Isaiah and his two sisters, Madison and Mackenzie, would also volunteer at the Samaritan Community Center in Rogers, Arkansas. The director said that he and his sister came in each week to help put together snack packs. And little Isaiah, who was very helpful, loved breaking down boxes. Now, Isaiah's parents, Mauricio and Kathy, had met in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and got married in 2002. Mauricio had previously been married, and he lived in California. He had 2 children from this marriage, Mauricio Jr. and Erica. They both lived with their mother. And Kathy had 4 children from her previous marriage. Her children were named Nicholas, Bailey, Spencer, and Quentin. The couple then had 2 children together who would be removed from their custody before Mauricio and Kathy then went on to have a daughter and Isaiah and his twin sister. So there was a total of 11 children between the pair. On the afternoon of March 29, 2015, Isaiah's mother, Kathy, would call 911 to report that Isaiah was unresponsive. When the first responders arrived at the family's home on 9 Creswell Circle in Bella Vista, they found the little boy lying on the floor on his back. When they asked the couple what had happened, they explained that they had just returned home from a family camping trip. But they had no idea what was wrong with the little boy. However, as the paramedics placed 6-year-old Isaiah on the stretcher, they noticed that he had multiple bruises, lacerations, and puncture wounds. Therefore, police were contacted. Sadly, Isaiah would pass away shortly after he arrived at the hospital at 12:23 a.m. on March 30th, 2015. It was discovered that the 6-year-old had signs of blunt force trauma to his head and extremities. He had also developed a severe case of sepsis. This infection had occurred after an object had been shoved into Isaiah's rectum, an object that police would later find out was a large stick. They also discovered that Isaiah had 23 separate wounds to his head. He had teeth that had been knocked or pulled out, his nose was broken, and he had a bizarre diamond-shaped injury on his abdomen. The boy's father, Mauricio, would tell doctors that his injuries, at least the ones on his back, were from a chemical burn that had taken place months earlier, after Isaiah had fallen into a puddle of bleach in the bathroom. According to Mauricio, Isaiah had been treated for these injuries at a hospital, but doctors were unable to confirm this. Now, when a search was conducted of the Torres' home, police found blood spatter on the walls, floor, and ceiling of the master bedroom and the attached master bath. Blood spatter was also found on 15-pound dumbbells that were inside the bathroom. And in the bedroom, a fireplace poker tool that had a diamond shape on it, similar to the one that was found on Isaiah's body, was discovered. There was additionally vomit and a stethoscope found on the bed. Then, when the family's camper was searched, the one that they had just used on their recent camping trip, detectives found a large circular blood stain on one of the mattresses. Between all of this and the fact that the parents did not show any emotional response when they were informed that Isaiah was dead, police brought Mauricio and Kathy down to the station for questioning. In Kathy's initial interview with detectives, she told them that the family had arrived home around 10 p.m. the previous day. And it was earlier, close to 2 p.m., that Isaiah had started to get a stomach ache. She had then, in turn, given him some Pepto-Bismol. According to her, Isaiah had been acting normal when they arrived back home. And he'd even taken a shower and put on his own pajamas. Kathy claimed that after the shower, she had left him sleeping in the master bedroom. But when she returned, just a moment later, Isaiah wasn't breathing, so she had contacted 911. The mother also denied any knowledge of Isaiah's injuries, instead suggesting that he was clumsy and often ran into doors. According to her, Isaiah had some dark circles under his eyes when they had returned back from their camping trip. She also tried to say that his nose wasn't broken, but rather it was always a little crooked, and she denied any wrongdoing. When authorities confronted Kathy with allegations of abuse, she stated that she loved her son and would never hurt him. According to Kathy, her and her husband never fought, and they rarely punished the kids at all. Now, Mauricio's story was much the same as Kathy's in regards to their camping trip, as well as little Isaiah's stomachache when they had returned back home. He said that they had given him medicine and made sure that he stayed hydrated. According to Mauricio, though, Isaiah had been very difficult to wake up in the car when they returned home. And he hadn't showered himself as Kathy had claimed, but rather he needed assistance. But when Mauricio had asked his wife Kathy if she thought they should bring the boy to the emergency room, she said no, because it was just a stomachache and it didn't warrant it. He also denied any knowledge of how Isaiah had obtained his injuries, saying that the little boy was just clumsy and maybe a virus had been the thing that killed him. He also stated that at one point, maybe Isaiah's injuries were due to negligence, but they had never been intentionally inflicted. Mauricio would even speculate to detectives that maybe his son had an undiagnosed condition like hypoglycemia or diabetes that could have been a factor in his death. He went on to tell detectives that his wife Kathy actually spent the most amount of time with Isaiah, but he knew that she would not hurt the children. Then he claimed that he was only guilty of one thing, which was his inability to save his son, and he had failed not only as a father, but as a man. Shortly after these statements were made, detectives took a break from interviewing Mauricio, and during this time, he grew increasingly anxious. Then, when they resumed their interview, Mauricio made multiple comments, insinuating that he thought Kathy had ratted him out or implicated him in hurting their son. So it wasn't very long after that the husband and wife began to turn on each other. And as they did, detectives began to uncover the horrifying truth about what had happened to Isaiah. Kathy had changed her story, and she was now telling detectives that she had previously seen her husband, Mauricio, hurt their son. According to her, he would beat him with his fists, extension cords, and a belt. She also admitted that on occasion, she had joined in with hitting Isaiah with this belt, but she didn't do it hard enough to hurt him. Isaiah's two sisters, who were just 6 and 7 at the time, were also brought in for questioning. And even though they told authorities that Mauricio had instructed them not to speak about Isaiah's death, they would confirm the camping story that their parents had told, with some major differences. One being that on the morning that Isaiah had died, one of his sisters had woken up to find him tied up in the bathtub by shoelaces. Apparently, Kathy and Mauricio were furious with Isaiah for eating a piece of cake. The sister also recalled their father taking Isaiah and dragging him into the camper later that day. Then he forced him to strip naked and beat him with a stick. Also, according to the girl, Isaiah had to sit down quite frequently during their trip as he was unwell. And by the time they had returned back home, Isaiah had to be carried in from the car. The little girl also told authorities that Isaiah was so out of it when they got home that the entire family had to help take his clothes off and shower him because he couldn't even stand up in the shower. After that, Kathy put on his pajamas, then gave him some gummy vitamins and green tea before putting him to bed. The little girl claimed that Isaiah was acting very strangely at this point. Then on April 7th, about a week after Isaiah's death, Mauricio, who was being held in jail on suspicion of murdering his son, requested to speak with the police captain. This came after he found out that his wife Kathy had filed an order of protection against him and was now blaming him for Isaiah's death. According to Kathy, she had not been with the family the entire day on the 29th, the day that 911 had been called. She claimed that around 2:30 p.m. she had gone to Lowe's and she was gone for a little under an hour. During that time, Mauricio had been left with the boy. Kathy then told a detective that she was scared of her husband Mauricio and that he had hurt Isaiah, which is why they were there. Now, when the detective went to speak with Mauricio, the very first thing that he would do was complain about his conditions in jail. He said that he needed more protein because he had just had a weight loss surgery, and he was cold because he didn't have a proper mattress. Boo-hoo. He then went on to describe his wife Kathy as being a very controlling person, who was just as responsible for Isaiah's death as he was. Though, according to Mauricio, his son's death was just an accident. While they were on their family trip, Mauricio claimed that Isaiah had eaten some cake, and this infuriated Kathy. So as punishment, he had forced a stick into Isaiah's rectum, then made him do squats as he and Kathy watched on. Mauricio even demonstrated what had happened to detectives. As the little boy was doing this, the parents decided that he wasn't moving fast enough for their sick pleasure, so Kathy forced him down on the stick even further. She then took the stick out and cleaned up. During Mauricio's confession to police, he laughed and claimed that his son looked so cute doing his squats, which is one of the sickest things I have ever heard. According to the father, the stick was something that they normally used to spank Isaiah with, because it was the only thing that he responded to, as the boy had anger issues, he claimed.
When you said that you did it once before, put the stick.
I did that one too. I told you.
How long before this last Sunday was that?
A while. I was spanking.
Mauricio would then pin the blame on his wife for abusing not only Isaiah, but also their two daughters. He stated that Kathy did not have the same problems with the two girls as she did with Isaiah. And Mauricio tried to say that he would often try to stop his wife from hurting the kids when he was around. He additionally told investigators that he did not believe that Kathy cared about him or their children, and he felt like he had betrayed his son.
The reason why she's not saying anything, because she doesn't want to implement herself. Does that make sense? Because she knows she's equally guilty.
Another thing that Mauricio would say during this interview was, "When my son died, a part of me died forever." Ultimately, both Kathy and Mauricio were arrested and charged with capital homicide, first-degree battery, and assault. The thing is, Child Protective Services had long been involved with the family, and they had investigated multiple reports of abuse of Mauricio and Kathy's children, even prior to Isaiah's birth. According to Mauricio's oldest daughter, Erica Torres, her father was her and her brother's living nightmare for a long time. When their own mother had divorced Mauricio prior to him meeting Kathy, he had lost contact with his children completely and had his parental rights taken away. His daughter Erica thought that things were done as far as him hurting children. But when she learned that he had gone on to have more kids, she called up her brother, Mauricio Torres Jr., and told him that she was terrified what could happen to their father's new children. Then in 2004, one of Kathy's daughters from her previous relationship accused Mauricio of raping her. It had been reported by the girl's aunt, but Mauricio denied touching the 4-year-old inappropriately. And the case would be closed due to lack of physical evidence and an incomplete account by the victim, who was only 4. Mauricio would then be questioned by Jonesboro police just months after this, in regards to more allegations made by Kathy's then 4-year-old daughter, the same one. And even though Child Services had records that this little girl and her siblings had previously been put into foster care due to allegations of physical abuse, the agency yet again determined that these claims were unsubstantiated. The thing is, this 4-year-old had told investigators that her stepfather, Mauricio, had instructed her not to tell anyone, and she never even told her own mother. When Mauricio had been questioned about these allegations, he claimed that the girl's biological father was just attacking him in an attempt to gain custody. Kathy would agree with Mauricio, saying that these indeed were just her ex's intentions. And again, in August of 2007, another report was filed with Child Services due to allegations of abuse, but would also be closed without any charges brought against Mauricio. Now at school, Isaiah had been a very happy boy who was ready to learn, but as he grew older, his demeanor started to change and he became more withdrawn. He also started to get more angry and combative towards both his teachers and peers. His teachers additionally noticed that Isaiah was stealing food from other students and rummaging through the trash in an attempt to find food. His teachers at the Ambassadors of Christ Academy, where the boy was enrolled in kindergarten, soon began noticing that Isaiah would come to school with bruises and cuts on his body, and these injuries never seemed to heal. As such, the teachers began taking notes and reporting their concerns to the Arkansas Department of Human Services. But it seems like nothing was done in regards to these concerns, as they were marked as unsubstantiated yet again. Then following these reports, Isaiah and his sisters were pulled from school and homeschooled the following year. Now, even though all the children in the home were being mistreated, Isaiah was treated much worse than the others. While the boy's siblings would be fed home-cooked meals or meals from restaurants, he was forced to eat rice and beans or peanut butter sandwiches. Isaiah also regularly had his birthday ignored, and his parents would instead only celebrate his twin sister, giving her affection and presents. Additionally, Isaiah never received Christmas presents and was instead given coal. As time went on, things only got worse for the boy, and Mauricio would make Isaiah drink his urine and eat his feces. The little boy was not allowed to take anything but cold showers. He was beaten with a cable, shoes, sticks, and a fist, and was often forced to sleep in a dog cage. Sometimes Mauricio would take a pair of underwear, dunk them into a bucket of his piss, then force Isaiah to wear them around the house on his head. One time, Mauricio even pulled the boy's teeth out using pliers and poured bleach on his body. Isaiah's older sisters would be forced to hit the boy with a stick, as well as monitor Isaiah on occasion to make sure that he was not escaping from his cage enclosure at night or stealing any food. One time, Isaiah was even forced to stay inside a trash bin for about a month. Kathy would end up admitting to her son's capital murder in March of 2017. She took a plea deal, which saw that the death penalty was removed from the table as a possible punishment. Yet she still maintained that she had not caused any of his injuries. Kathy would be sentenced to life in prison. When it was Mauricio's turn to go to trial, his defense tried to put the entire blame on Kathy. But it was obvious that the father had something to do with the death and abuse of his son Isaiah. During the trial, many witnesses would be called to the stand, including Mauricio's family, who testified that Mauricio's mother had never been in his life, and his father, Edgar Torres, had punished Mauricio as a child by making him engage in rigorous physical activity, and he often overdid it. Mauricio would also be struck with a belt if he slowed down, and he was called derogatory names by his father. Then, many of Mauricio's adult children and stepchildren would take the stand to describe the horror that their lives had been when they lived with Mauricio. All of them that testified would accuse Mauricio of physically abusing them. He hit them, kicked them, threw them around, and would often yank and drag them by their ears. Mauricio's son, Mauricio Torres Jr., testified that one time when he couldn't get his shoes on fast enough, his father had kicked him so hard that he had vomited from it, then was forced to eat the vomit. He also claimed that his father would lock him and his brother into a room and force them to fight each other. Now, almost all of Mauricio's children also claimed that he had made them perform sexual acts on him and each other. Some of the witnesses told the jury that they had even been raped with objects. It seemed like Mauricio hurting his children was a very regular thing in the household. The adult children also told the jury that Mauricio was the dominant parent in the relationship, even though he had tried to make it seem like quite the opposite during his interrogation with police. At the end of the trial, Mauricio Torres would be convicted for the abuse and death of his son Isaiah, and in November of 2016, he was sentenced to death. However, in 2019, this was overturned due to a sentencing technicality. The Arkansas Supreme Court stated that the SA of Isaiah could not be used as a basis for seeking a capital homicide conviction. But then in March of 2020, Mauricio was again convicted on his charges. However, this was declared as a mistrial after Mauricio's stepson jumped out of the witness stand and tried to attack him during his sentencing. Mauricio again returned to court in February of 2023, and he would beg the jury not to have him killed. He was then convicted a third time and sentenced to life behind bars without the possibility of parole. A woman named Amy Gorley, who has no connection to Isaiah or his family, but sat in on Mauricio's trials, established the Isaiah Torres Memorial Scholarship Fund in his memory. This fund financially helps students who are enrolled in the Child Advocacy Studies program at Northwest Arkansas Community College. Isaiah's funeral was held shortly after his death at the Emerson Funeral Home in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Rasheed Bryant was born on December 13, 2018, to his mother, Jabora DeBreese, and his father, Christopher Bryant, in Opelika, Florida. And he also had 10 other siblings. Rasheed's case is one that is incredibly sad, and it's made even sadder by the fact that there's nothing written about his personality or his likes. There was also no memorial, no vigil, and no proper obituary written for Rasheed. So before Rasheed was even born, his parents were already well known to Florida's Child Protective Services. Rasheed's mother, Jabora's DCF history began back in June of 2004 when she tested positive for marijuana at the birth of her second child. The next year, DCF would receive a report saying that there were 2 small children playing outside at Jabora's house, unsupervised. At the birth of her third and fourth child in 2010 and 2011, Jabora would again test positive for marijuana. Now, since this had been a recurring thing at this point, the family was referred to a private agency for services. There were 2 reports filed with the DCF hotline in April of 2013. The first one saying that Christopher had punched Jabora in the stomach while she was pregnant. And the second was a report that Christopher was running away from the police while holding one of his small sons in his arms and then throwing him into a car. The family was then put under DCF supervision, and 3 months later, Jabora would again test positive for marijuana at the birth of her 5th child. These drug results, on top of the prior allegations, led Child Services to removing the children from the home this time. However, the children were returned to their parents less than a month later, on August 8th, and a judge would continue to oversee the family. Now, there was also reports prior to Rasheed's birth that the home was filthy and that a relative who often watched the children would smoke methamphetamine in front of them. DCF had also been told that the home had no water, there were roaches everywhere, the children weren't going to school, nor bathing, nor eating properly. The mother and father were also said to have been smoking marijuana with crack at this time, and they were selling their food stamps. There was also another report that said that Christopher had punched his oldest son in the face and then thrown him into a fence. And there was yet another report saying that Jabora, her sister, and the oldest son had beaten up a neighbor, and the two adults had been arrested. So like their substantial DCF history, Jabora and Christopher also had lengthy criminal records. Jabora had actually been arrested 26 times prior to Rasheed's death, including aggravated battery, burglary, car theft, armed robbery, armed carjacking, kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon. Chris's history is less extensive, but it's still significant. He had been arrested 14 times, including charges of fraud, dealing in stolen property, cocaine possession, domestic violence, battery, robbery, grand theft, burglary, and child abuse. And when I said the home was dirty, it wasn't just dirty, it was said to be uninhabitable. The children were apparently sleeping on the floor. The entire house smelled of feces. And at one point, almost all the children had an open, red, raw skin infection. Then in 2018, the year Rasheed would be born, DCF would receive more than a half dozen reports about Jabora and Chris's children, which would result in 2 investigations. During these investigations, it was noted that the family's water was again or still shut off, and Jabora had not paid the rent in 2 months. Chris was in jail at the time. Another report that occurred in August of 2018 alleged that the children, there were now 8 of them, were often left unsupervised, and the 15-year-old would be the one in charge. DCF, however, offered no services to the family at this time. Chris's own mother even told DCF investigators that her son and daughter-in-law were not properly taking care of the children and were using drugs. She also told them that the older children were not attending school. Chris's mother would also encourage one of Chris and Jabora's children, one of the older ones, to speak with DCF. And he would report that his mother had no money and no food. He stated that his mother uses drugs, gives him whoopings with her hands, and hits him in the stomach and legs. Less than a month before Rasheed was born, a report came into DCF saying that the family was now living in a car. Chris and Jabora denied this, saying that they were staying at a nearby motel. However, they could provide no proof of that. And finally, on November 22nd, 2018, all 8 of Jabora and Chris's children were taken into DCF custody. The following month, baby Rasheed would be born on December 13th. Only 2 days after he was born, Child Protective Services would take him into custody as well, and he would go live with a foster family, while his siblings would live with their paternal grandmother. However, Jabora and Chris wanted all of their children back, so they agreed to take various parenting classes as well as go to therapy sessions. They also agreed to find jobs and provide stable housing for the kids. So by August of 2019, a judge would give the parents supervised visits, followed by weekend visitation. This plan would rely heavily on the vigilance of the children's paternal and maternal grandmother, who were at the house frequently. They were to look for signs of drug abuse or child abuse and report these suspicions to either a case manager or police immediately. The judge's order also made contingency plans for if one or both of the parents got inappropriate or aggressive during one of their visitations. If so, the visitation would immediately be ended. What's the point of even allowing visitation if this is a very clear possibility? And Jabora and Chris's visitation with the children would be canceled only a few months later, in October of 2019, when they failed to inform the judge, or anybody else for that matter, that they had moved. The couple, who was supposed to be seeing therapists, holding down jobs, and stable housing, were doing none of it. They had both missed nearly, if not all, of their scheduled appointments with therapists. And in September of 2019, they had again been evicted and were living at a Clarion Inn near the airport. At one point during this time that Jabora and Chris were trying to regain custody of their children, a judge denied their reunification, and Jabora got so upset that she refused to go to a visitation with the children. That makes sense. You want your children so bad and you love them so much that you want them back, but you get angry and you're not going to go see them for something they didn't do. So even though nothing had changed, in January of 2020, a judge would allow Chris and Jabora to again start having their supervised visits with their children. And then a supervisor with a private case management agency who was overseeing the couple's children for DCF recommended that the children be reunited with the parents, saying that the conditions of return had been met by Jabora and Chris. I'm sorry, what? But that was absolutely not true, because in the 15 months that the children had been in state care, Rasheed's parents had done absolutely nothing that the judge had asked them to do. And since Chris had successfully avoided all of his therapy appointments, instead of saying, okay, you didn't do this, you can't have your children back, the judge decided instead to just take that off of his plan, and he was no longer responsible for going to therapy. They had also in the same month, January of 2020, stopped paying their rent again. So between September of 2019 and January of 2020, they had been evicted, had to live in a car or motel, gotten a new place, and again decided to stop paying the rent. According to confidential DCF records, this reunification of the children and parents was not supported, given that the reason for removal had not been remedied. Chris's attorney, however, was insisting that the children had only been removed from the parents' care because they were homeless. He said that the parents now again had a place to live and the children wanted to be with their parents. First off, not the reason they were removed, I hope. Secondly, I doubt those children want anything to do with their parents. And they're not going to have a place for very long since they already stopped paying their rent again, so. The judge would agree with Chris's attorney and decided to let the children be reunited with their parents. However, Judge Baccarat, the one who was overseeing the family, did not heed DCF's recommendation that the children should be returned to the parents slowly and not all at once. They asked that she begin with only returning one of the oldest children. Instead, she ordered that Rasheed and 3 of his siblings be returned to their parents immediately. The 5 other children would be returned 2 months later. The judge said that it was in the best interest of the children to be with their parents. And the judge would tell Rasheed's parents that they could not go back to their old habits. Well, they're not old habits because they never changed them, and I don't think that talking to them is gonna do a goddamn thing. So on February 28th, 2020, Rasheed, along with 3 of his siblings, were returned to his parents. And the children were sent home without any supportive services to help Jabora. The parents were also at this time given liberal, unsupervised visits with the remaining 5 children. And about a month later, to everybody's surprise, Jabora would give birth to her 10th child. She had previously denied in court that she was pregnant at all. And only 3 weeks after the birth of her 10th child, the judge decided to return the remaining children to her. And it was noted in a DCF file that this new baby was deemed to be in a safe home. In August of 2020, only a few months after Rasheed and the first 3 children had been returned home to their parents, caseworkers discontinued all supervision of them. At that point, the records say there was no ongoing assessment of the children's safety performed each month, despite federal regulations mandating it. And in October of 2020, a judge ordered that all oversight of the entire family be terminated. They were on their own. They were good parents again, in the judge's eyes, I guess. So as I said, supervision was cut off from the first 4 children in August, and complete supervision of all the children was cut off a few months later in October. However, in May of 2020, prior to either one of these dates, Rasheed had broken his leg, and Jabora had given 3 different stories as to how it had happened. She first would say that he was dropped into his playpen by one of his siblings. However, a text would later be found to her sister saying that she, quote, beat his ass. And 6 days later, Jabora would text another aunt a picture of Rasheed's leg, badly swollen. Around 2 weeks after Jabora had texted about Rasheed's injuries, so he'd had a broken leg for 2 weeks with no medical treatment at this point, a family volunteer advocate for children who had been working with the family noticed the little boy's leg injury, and it was reported to the child welfare caseworker. The caseworker called up Jabora and insisted that Rasheed needed to be taken to the hospital, and finally, she complied and did. So the caseworker decided to meet Jabora and Rasheed at the hospital. But Jabora already had a third story ready and waiting. She told the caseworker that Rasheed had been playing in the top bunk bed, he's not even 2, and had rolled and fallen out. Jabora would also lie to the doctor once there. She told him that Rasheed had only injured his leg 2 days prior to the doctor's visit, rather than the 2 weeks that it had actually been. And it was said that the doctor offered Jabora 2 options, an x-ray or supportive care, painkillers for Rasheed. She decided to go with the latter. Of course, she didn't want to get an x-ray done so they could see how bad of a break it was. However, records from the hospital, Jackson North, would show that Jabora had actually refused the x-ray, and she did not seek any further medical treatment after that for him. The caseworker would take notes while at the hospital with Jabora and Rasheed, and she noted that Rasheed could stand on his leg. However, as soon as he realized that it was painful, he would stop walking on the leg altogether. It also said that the doctor suspected no foul play, and the caseworker did not seem at all concerned. Now, while Jabora never faced any charges for the injury, DCF did end up taking Rasheed away for a little while. Why, I'm not sure, since the caseworker did not appear to be concerned. However, Rasheed was returned less than 2 months after he had been seen by a doctor for his leg injury. And that's the same month that DCF decided to discontinue supervision of him. So only a few weeks after DCF had cut off all supervision of the entire family, Jabora would wake up around 10:30 a.m. on November 6th, and she claimed that she found Rasheed unresponsive and not breathing. His lips were blue, his jaw clenched, and foam was seeping out of his nose and mouth. But instead of calling emergency services, she decided to call her sister, Ashanti. Ashanti later told police that her sister was panicked, crying, and upset about her baby, though I have a hard time believing that. On the phone, Ashanti told Jabora to call an ambulance, and she rushed over. When she arrived at 11:50 a.m., Jabora was holding Rasheed, and there were no paramedics there. Rasheed was not breathing and had not been breathing an hour before when his mother had found him. Yet they still wouldn't call 911 until a half hour later. And Jabora and her sister would begin CPR as the 911 operator had instructed them to do, but clearly it was much too late. Jabora would tell investigators that after she had found Rasheed unresponsive, she had placed her son on the floor, propped his head up on a towel, and began resuscitation efforts. But red-tinged mucus was seeping from his nose. Rasheed would be taken to Miami Jackson North Medical Center, where he was unable to be revived. He was only 22 months old. While police were there, they noticed that not only was the home of Jabora and Chris filthy, but they had used black garbage bags, tinfoil, cardboard, and even a small mattress to shield their windows from any sunlight, or most likely, prying neighbors' eyes. When Rasheed's autopsy was done, the medical examiner confirmed that Rasheed had 2 skull fractures, one old and one fresh. He also had a healing rib fracture and a recently broken leg. The cause of Rasheed's death was complications of acute and chronic blunt force injuries. Contributing causes were parental neglect and withholding proper medical care. Rasheed's death was, of course, deemed a homicide. And it was only a couple days after the toddler's death that Jabora and Chris were arrested and charged with child neglect leading to great bodily harm. But these charges were later upgraded to manslaughter and aggravated child abuse. When Jabora spoke with the police, she told them that she had not called 911 right away because she had panicked and didn't know what to do. She also did not want the other children in the home aware of what was going on. Jabora also said she had never physically harmed her son and that Rasheed had actually suffered 2 seizures in the past few months. Jabora also said that on the day before Rasheed died, he had eaten raviolis, a Rice Krispie treat, and blue Kool-Aid for dinner. He was then running around and playing with his siblings before they went to bed at 10 p.m. Yeah, with a broken leg, I'm sure he was. And Rasheed's aunt, Ashanti, would back up these claims, saying that, yeah, Rasheed was running around and hugging his relatives like usual. One of Rasheed's siblings, however, had said that she had not seen the little boy walk on his leg since it had been injured months ago. In fact, she said that Rasheed had pretty much been confined to his bedroom, where he would lay in his bed almost all day. Chris told detectives that he had no involvement in any of the injuries to his son and hadn't seen anyone else inflict these injuries either. However, it might have been his siblings, he said. And at the time of Rasheed's death, the family was again facing eviction. Now, some of Rasheed's older siblings would speak with police and tell them what they had witnessed going on in the home. Rasheed's older brother told police that Chris would hit Rasheed, and he would make Rasheed's siblings do the same. Chris and Jabora would also make the children hold Rasheed's head underwater. And the children complied because they were scared that if they didn't, they would be the ones getting beaten. In Rasheed's final weeks, his brother reported that his skin looked like it was about to fall off, and his stomach was sunken in. He also said that he and his other siblings would try to sneak Rasheed food and blankets whenever his parents were not looking. All the children in the home said that they would hear Rasheed crying from getting beaten, and his crying would only lead to more beatings. And Rasheed's older brother also told the authorities that he too was abused. He said a relative who had moved into the home with the family would whip him with belts and tie a rope around his penis while they were in the shower. Rasheed's older brother also told authorities that he had noticed something was wrong with Rasheed's leg about 2 months prior to his death. The teen had placed Rasheed in his bed and noticed that he cringed and cried whenever his leg was touched. And when he tried to rub Rasheed's thigh to maybe help it feel better, Rasheed would push his hand away. And when the teen reported the injury to his mother, Jabora massaged the thigh, which clearly hurt him, and made him walk around on it. The then 16-year-old brother also described another incident, which he called the stroke. Rasheed, who had been eating ravioli, vomited it all over the bed. Moments later, he noticed that the little boy was laying on his back with his legs up in the air, stiff and shaking. When that happened, Jabora had put a spoon in Rasheed's mouth because his tongue had become stuck to the roof of his mouth, she said. Rasheed cried for about 20 minutes, and his brother said he doesn't remember if his mother sought any medical treatment after that. I'm going to go with a no. And after this stroke, as the brother called it, Rasheed could no longer move his right arm at all. It was dead. Now, one of Rasheed's older sisters had been living with an aunt for one reason or another, probably because her parents sucked. But she had gone over to Chris and Jabora's house to visit on November 2nd. And when she did, she noticed that Rasheed was not only looking smaller, but she remembers him being limp on his right side, vomiting after eating, and having to be propped up against a wall in order for him to sit. She said Rasheed's eyes were also moving in different directions at the time. So this poor little boy had a traumatic brain injury for days prior to his death. Only days after Rasheed's death, the state child welfare administrators filed to get custody of the remaining siblings. And in this filing, it said that Rasheed had died after sustaining multiple injuries due to severe abuse and medical neglect while in the care of his parents. Now, under Florida law, DCF must release their records when a child dies of parental abuse or neglect. But Florida's Child Welfare Agency violated this law and they refused to release Rasheed's records to the public. Can't imagine why. They were saying that Rasheed's cause of death had not yet been determined to be from abuse or neglect, contrary to what their filing for custody of the other children said. So the Miami Herald, as well as about a dozen other media companies and advocacy groups, sued department administrators at DCF in February of 2022 when they refused to release them. The judge who was handling the case recognized that DCF had a tough job, but she also noted that the agency had ample evidence that the little boy had been abused from the medical examiner's report, as well as reports from the Miami-Dade Police and the state attorney's office. The judge then ordered DCF to turn over these records to the media and public on March 1st, 2022. And apparently DCF also looked into a discrepancy between photos of Rasheed that had been entered into an internal casework system and GPS tracking data that was embedded into the photos. And this discrepancy raised the possibility that the caseworker did not actually go to see the family on the days and times that she said she did. And on one occasion, an agency email says that the caseworker copy and pasted from a prior home visit to document the results of a later visit. And around the time that the kids had been returned to Chris and Jabora, the DCF case file said that the house was clean and tidy. When Rasheed had died, however, less than 11 months later, there were holes and pockmarks in the walls, garbage littered the floors, the shower and tub was full of mold, clothes and other possessions were stored in garbage bags, mattresses didn't have sheets, the ceiling was leaking, there was what appeared to be a stain from human waste or blood on a mattress, blanket, and part of the floor. It was a chaotic mess. So the caseworker who had been working on Rasheed's case had been placed on a leave of absence without pay a week after Rasheed's death. She was then fired on December 2nd, 2020. And only 5 months earlier, this particular caseworker had actually been praised in an employee review for working with Jabora and Chris to have their kids returned to them. And unbelievably, or not, given everything we've already heard at this point, Jabora would give birth to her 11th child while she was in jail. Christopher Bryant and Jabora Jaree pleaded not guilty to the charges. They are now awaiting trial and are being held without bond. Rasheed's funeral was held on December 7th, 2020 at the Trinity Funeral Chapel. He was then buried at the Dade Memorial Cemetery.
Instead of protecting him and nurturing him, guiding him, they tortured him, battered him, degraded him, and starved him.
Antonio, or Tony Carlito Renova, was born on June 15, 2014, to his mother, Stephanie Byington, and his father, Emilio Renova Sr. He also had 5 siblings. Tony was raised in Columbus, Montana, but at the time of this story, he was living in Great Falls, Montana. He loved animals, making people laugh, Mickey Mouse, and playing in the mud with his monster trucks and cars. Tony was said to be lovable, kind, and he always had a smile on his face. Tony's biological parents, Stephanie and Emilio, who were part of the Crow tribe, had prior criminal histories, and there had also been multiple instances of domestic violence between the two. In April of 2008, Billings police officers would respond to a report of assault at the couple's apartment. Stephanie, who was pregnant at the time, reportedly had tried to stop Emilio from drinking alcoholic beverages, and he responded to this by kicking and punching her in the stomach. He was charged with assault for this incident. And then, in October of 2009, Emilio was again charged for assault. This time, Emilio had attacked his sister and left bruises and cuts on her face, neck, and hands. Stephanie and one of the couple's young children was also present during this attack. Then in August of 2012, Stephanie would be charged with kidnapping after taking off with children in a vehicle. These children were relatives of some sort, and Stephanie was also charged with endangering these same children for bringing them into a hotel room where meth was being used. The kidnapping charge would be dismissed later that year, and in the same year, Stephanie was also charged with stealing money. In April of 2014, Emilio was charged for a third time with assault. This time, Stephanie was 6 months pregnant, and he had pulled out a pistol on her. She also reported that Emilio had struck her in the head and tried to run her over with his pickup truck. During that particular incident, Stephanie and Emilio actually were not a couple. They had broken up in November of 2013, after Stephanie had given birth to 2 of their children and was pregnant with their third, Tony. The couple, of course, would later end up getting back together, though. Oh, and also in 2014, Emilio was charged with felony robbery when he and 3 other men entered a home where a woman and her 18-month-old child were sleeping. They were all wearing face masks and were armed with rifles. After they broke in, however, they asked the woman where the beer was and then proceeded to only steal a phone before leaving. Emilio was ultimately sentenced on that charge of robbery, and he was ordered to undergo anger management training as well as register as a violent offender. So when Tony was born in June of 2014, he was born with fetal alcohol syndrome, and both of his parents were in jail at the time as well. Therefore, when Tony was only 3 days old, he went into a foster home. Tony's new foster parents were ironically named Christy and Jeff Foster, and the couple had had foster children in the past. The Fosters had a lot of love to give. However, they had never been able to conceive any children on their own, so they were constantly fostering new children. The Fosters recently moved from Florida to Montana when they decided they wanted to give yet another child a loving home, and soon after, Tony was placed with them. When Tony went to live with the Fosters, they immediately fell in love with the little boy and knew that they wanted to adopt him as their own. However, even though the social worker had told the Fosters that it was unlikely that Tony's birth parents would ever regain custody of him, it was also unlikely that the Fosters would be able to permanently adopt the little boy. While Native American foster children may be placed with non-Native American families temporarily, it is known to be very difficult for them to be adopted by a non-Native American family. Regardless of if the child lived on the reservation, regardless of how much or how little Native American DNA the child has, and even regardless of the child's biological parents' wishes. Now, because of this, the Fosters, by the advice of the social worker, would regularly take Tony to powwows and other Native American cultural events, sometimes even traveling long distances to attend them. The social worker had told the couple that they would stand a better chance of being approved for adopting Tony if they showed his tribe's court system, Crow's Nation, that they would keep in touch with his roots and culture. And it was great for Tony to attend these events as well, as he was said to really love the dancing and drumming. Now, even though the Fosters loved Tony unconditionally, he could be hard to manage at times. Due to his fetal alcohol syndrome, Tony could be a handful. When he would act out, though, his foster parents would just tightly hold him until he calmed down again. He would then go on like nothing had happened. The Fosters did not believe in spanking or any other kind of violent punishment. Things seemed to be going well with Tony in the Fosters' home. Even their extended family loved him. But in 2018, the Fosters would discover that the Crow Tribal Court was moving to have Tony placed back with his biological parents and removed from their home. And due to the fact that the Fosters were not tribal members, they received very little judicial process. They were not granted an appearance before the judge and had to conduct any correspondence through a tribal social worker. Regardless of all their efforts and love for Tony, however, the Fosters were told that they were not going to be able to keep him. The tribal judge had said, and this is a quote, "I'll be damned if I'm the first Crow judge to let a white couple adopt a Crow child." And this part really blows my mind and aggravates the hell out of me. Why is that okay? Why? She signed his death sentence. So, on this judge's order, Tony was introduced to his biological parents, whom he had never met before. It's unclear what Tony thought of this, though. The Fosters were the only parents that he had ever known. He had been with them since he was 3 days old. That was his mom and dad. And the reason that Tony was being returned to his biological parents now was because they had been recently released from jail. However, Stephanie and Emilio did have to complete a probationary period first. They both had to get jobs and a stable place to live before Tony could be returned to them. Time with Tony for them started off with a couple of supervised visits where a social worker was present to make sure that nothing happened, like they didn't take off running with him. These supervised visits then developed into non-supervised visits as well as overnights. So sadly, despite their attempts to adopt Tony, it was soon made clear that Tony would be leaving the Fosters' home. And one of the last trips that the Fosters would share with Tony was a vacation to Disney World in February of 2019. The entire family attended, and they spoiled him, knowing that this would probably be the only time that he ever got to go to Disney World, and they wanted him to remember it. On the day that Christy and Jeff dropped off Tony with his biological parents for the last time in March of 2019, they told him, "If they start hurting you, tell somebody. Tell an adult. They can help you." The Fosters were both heartbroken and fearful that something would happen to Tony while he was in the care of his biological parents, especially given the interaction that they had had with them just days prior. The Fosters had told Stephanie and Emilio that they were going to bring Tony's stuff with him, his bed and his toys. But Stephanie and Emilio told them, "Don't bring his bed, we don't have any room for it. Don't bring his toys, we don't have any room for those either." So in his new home, Tony did not have a bed, he didn't have his toys, he didn't have a room, he was sleeping on the floor. How is this okay just because his parents are Native American and living on a reservation? And while at the Fosters, Tony also had a little tablet of his own. Of course, he was not allowed to bring this with him to his biological parents' house because he could make phone calls and send emails from it. Instead, the Fosters bought Tony a tiny book, and inside one of the pages, they placed their phone number, an address, and a little note that said, "Mommy loves you." Now, Stephanie and Emilio made all kinds of promises to the Fosters, including that they could be Tony's godparents, that they would be able to go and visit him anytime they liked, that they would be able to take him for weekends as well as vacations on occasion. But as soon as the biological parents got back custody of Tony, they barely even let him call Christy and Jeff on the phone. At first, the Fosters had been allowed to do video calls with Tony, but then that went away, and things went even further downhill from there. During one rare telephone call with the then 4-year-old, Tony was on the phone crying, and Christy could hear Stephanie in the background shouting, "She's not your mommy, I am." The Fosters had become increasingly frustrated and disappointed with their attempts to keep in contact with Tony. So when Christy was offered a better job in Nashville, the Fosters decided to move. And even so, Christy still kept in touch with the social worker and told the social worker that if anything at all happened, they would love to take Tony back into their home. But to make things even worse, the social worker broke it to the Fosters that even if Tony's biological parents were unable to care for him, they would not be able to have him back either. He would just go back into the foster system. Then in June of 2019, only 3 months after Tony had been placed back with his biological parents, they would take him to Benefits Emergency Room for bruising on his face. The doctor there would describe him as having sad eyes. At the time of this visit, emergency department staff also noticed that Tony's then 2-year-old sibling had pretty much no teeth, as they had all decayed away. And his 1-year-old sibling had extremely rotten teeth as well. And all 3 children were said to be very unclean. Due to all of this, the doctor had called Child Protective Services. However, by the time they arrived, the family had already left the hospital. They then tried to locate the family, but were unable to, so they closed the case. However, they didn't try very hard, or really at all, because at the time, both Stephanie and Emilio were on probation, so they would have had their address as well as their telephone numbers. Then on November 20th at 9:07 a.m., Stephanie made a call to 911, saying that her son Tony was lying on the floor unresponsive. As first responders were sent to the scene, a 911 dispatcher talked Stephanie through doing CPR. But she reportedly told the dispatcher that there was blood coming out of Tony's mouth, and she freaked out. When Great Falls police officers arrived at the apartment building where Tony and his family lived, near Valley View Elementary, they found the little boy laying on the floor in his bedroom, and he was unresponsive as well as bleeding from his nose and his mouth. And when the paramedics arrived shortly after, they gave Tony CPR, but he was still unresponsive, and he would then be pronounced dead at the scene. First responders at the scene noted that Stephanie would be very upset for a little while, and then she would calm down completely. And Emilio did not seem very upset at all, not reacting at all the way a parent should after such a tragedy. Originally, the police believed that there was brain matter found on Tony's clothing. However, they later discovered that it was some sort of glue that had previously been used to close up some sort of laceration to his head. This injury was about the size of a silver dollar. Tony was also covered in bruises, and his legs appeared abnormal and possibly broken. He was also very thin and malnourished. Tony had gone to the doctors in February of 2019 when he was still at the Foster's home. And at that time, he was a healthy 44 pounds. However, when he was found dead, he was a mere 31 pounds. Tony had been starved and beaten to death. It was no accident. When police officers looked through the apartment after Tony's passing, they discovered smeared blood on the inside as well as the ledge of the bathtub. Along with Stephanie and Emilio, 2 other adults had been in the apartment the night prior, Rex Obertail and Tiana Small. One police officer who had arrived to the scene spotted Rasco carrying a trash bag out of the apartment into the dumpster. Upon inspection of the trash bag, the officer found a bloody rag with gory stuff on it. Alcoholic beverage containers and clothing were also found. When questioned about bringing this trash out, Rasco would tell police that he had cleaned up the apartment because he did not want it to appear dirty when the police arrived. Like they give a shit. The other visitor from the previous night, Tiana Small, also spoke with police. She reported that the night prior, the group had drank several cases of beer and twisted tea. She said at one point, Tony had gotten out of bed and he had gotten in trouble for this. As punishment, Stephanie and Emilio took the little boy into the bathroom. There, they gave him a cold shower. Emilio stayed in there with Tony, and Stephanie would come out to call her sister. And then apparently Rasco went into the bathroom with Emilio because Tiana says that she then heard Emilio and Rasco beating the child, with Rasco egging Emilio on and calling Tony terrible names. Tiana then told police that she later needed to use the bathroom, and Emilio told her that Tony was still in there. When she went in, at first she didn't see Tony. She just noticed that the shower was still running and that there was no steam, meaning that it was still cold water. Tiana then saw Tony, who looked very sad, as she said, and was holding very large, heavy bottles over his head as punishment. Tiana also told police that this was a punishment that Stephanie would often use on the little boy, and she would record it for her own sick pleasure or something. At one point during the night, Tiana and Stephanie would leave the apartment to go visit a friend, and it was then that Stephanie told her that she was worried and stressed out because she was not supposed to have Tony, and Child Protective Services was looking for him, which was not true. Emilio Renova, Stephanie Byington, and Rasco Birdtail were all arrested and charged in connection with Tony's death. All 3 were then each held on a $500,000 bond at the Cascade County Detention Center. Tony's siblings were placed with Child Protective Services. Rasco Birdtail was charged with deliberate homicide and tampering with evidence. Stephanie was charged with deliberate homicide, assault to a minor, criminal child endangerment, and endangering the welfare of a child. Emilio was charged with deliberate homicide, criminal child endangerment, endangering the welfare of a child, and assault on a minor. He also then later faced 2 more charges of assault on a minor after videos were found on his phone. In these videos, Emilio and Stephanie can be seen abusing Tony for wetting his pants. In one of them, you can see Tony being taken to the bathroom and hit over and over again, even after he's already on the floor. When Emilio was interviewed by police, he admitted that he had been drinking the night prior, and when he had woke up that morning, he had gone outside to smoke a cigarette. Shortly after, his wife Stephanie came outside to tell him that their son Tony was not breathing. He claimed ignorance as to why Tony had any injuries or to his cause of death. And while Emilio admitted that he was the last person to touch Tony, when police questioned him further on this, he got agitated and began swearing at them. There were also discrepancies in Emilio's statements to police. There was blood found on his pants that he insisted was nail polish. But he also said he did not touch his son or assist in the CPR after he had been found unresponsive, so there would be no reason why he would have blood on his clothes. Emilio also appeared to have blood on his face and lip when police arrived that he had been trying to wipe off. In addition to that, the injuries that occurred on Tony's body could not have happened in such a short period of time while he was outside smoking a cigarette. When police spoke with Stephanie, she told them that she had heard Emilio and Rasco beating Tony. She said that she also knew that Emilio had used glue on one of Tony's wounds. Stephanie also reported to them that a few weeks prior, Emilio had actually kicked his son into an object, injuring him. She also admitted that she and Emilio had on previous occasions beat Tony with belts and electrical cords. So one of Emilio's attorneys would ask for a 60-year sentence for his client, with 20 of those being suspended. He said that Emilio had been classified as uncaring and unemotional. However, there had been times after Tony's death that he had been visibly upset. He said that his client could not fathom how he had woken up to Tony not breathing and dead. Really? This same attorney also said that Stephanie had never made up any excuses for her involvement in the crime, and she had been in an abusive relationship with Emilio that inhibited her ability to stand up to him. In February of 2021, Rasco Birdtail would plead guilty to charges of assault of a minor, by accountability, and tampering with evidence. The deliberate homicide charge had been dropped after there was no evidence or any DNA evidence found on Tony's body, suggesting that Rasco had killed the little boy. He had been egging on Emilio instead. Rasco had no criminal history up to this point. However, after Tony's death, he had been accused of strangling a family member, as well as aggravated burglary. However, in relation to Tony's murder, he was sentenced on one count to 5 years at the Montana State Prison, and on the other count, 10 years. These sentences are to run consecutively, and he will at one point be eligible for parole. In court, Rasco would apologize for not doing anything the night of Tony's murder. However, he said that he was worried that Emilio would go after his family if he did. Right, that's why you were also actively encouraging it too, huh? Around the same time that Rasco took his plea deal, Stephanie also took a plea deal. Her plea agreement amended the initial deliberate homicide charge to accountability to deliberate homicide, assault on a minor, criminal child endangerment, and endangering the welfare of a child. In addition, she was also to testify against her husband at trial. The judge gave Stephanie Byington 100 years with no chance of parole for 30 years on the charge of homicide. On the count of criminal child endangerment, she received 10 years, which are to run consecutively. And Emilio Renova was scheduled to go to trial as well. However, he also decided to take a plea deal. In his plea agreement, he was allowed to plead no contest. And in return, the state agreed to not make a sentencing recommendation. It was completely left up to the judge. And in court, Emilio would say, "I know everyone thinks I'm a monster or whatever, but I did love Tony. I miss him every day. I don't care what anybody says. He's my baby." Emilio said that Tony's death has ruined their family and his whole life. Yeah, that's what happens when you kill a child. What did you expect? Emilio would also end up receiving 100 years in prison with no chance of parole. During their sentencing hearing, the judge would say that despite the trauma that the defendants had been through in their lives, nothing can excuse the crime against Tony. The two most responsible for his murder were his parents. The judge said instead of nurturing him, they tortured, battered, degraded, and starved him as part of a pattern of abuse leading up to his death. And only the heaviest punishment was appropriate for them. The judge also said that Rasco did more than just ignore it or walk away. He instead encouraged it and tried to protect the murderers. Tony's aunt and grandfather spoke to the court, asking that both Emilio and Rasco receive the death penalty or life without the possibility of parole. And Quincy Bad Moccasin Sr., Stephanie's father, also addressed Emilio and Rasco. He said, "What kind of person beats a child? What kind of monster could do what Emilio did to baby Tony?" Bad Moccasin said he's also hoping that Emilio is given prison justice for his crime. And in his mind, Rasco is just as guilty of Tony's murder as Emilio is. However, he had nothing to say about his daughter, Stephanie, who admitted to beating Tony on a few occasions. On November 24th, 2019, a candlelight memorial vigil was planned outside the apartment building in Great Falls where Tony's body was found. People stopped by to drop off flowers, toys, cards, and hold candles. They also collected donations for Toby's House Crisis Nursery in memory of Tony. And sadly, Christy and Jeff Foster only learned of Tony's death a few months after it happened. Somebody who lived in Montana and was a friend of Christy and Jeff's had seen it on the local news and recognized the name and called them to tell them. The Fosters no longer held any legal privileges for information about Tony. No official involved with the investigation called them. No caring social worker reached out to them. And a final wish of the Fosters was that they could claim Tony's body, since his parents were in jail and guilty of murdering him. The Fosters wanted to bury Tony in Tennessee, giving him a proper service and being able to visit the little boy anytime they wanted. However, Tony's biological family was instead given custody of his remains, and a funeral was held on November 26, 2019, at the Lodge Grass Cemetery in Lodge Grass, Montana.
Shouted from just a few seats behind Vega during this PC court appearance over the weekend, telling the magistrate that he was the last one with the kids.
I don't care. I don't care. You're making me look like I'm a bad person.
Misael and Marina Vega were born on August 31st, 2023, to Angelina Calderon and Fernando Vega in Houston, Texas. The twin girls also had two older siblings. And unfortunately, these baby girls never had a chance to develop any likes, dislikes, or hobbies, as they were taken from this world at such a very young age. The girls' parents, Angelina and Fernando, had began dating when they were in high school, around the time that they were 16. However, their relationship had never been a good one. It had always been very toxic and volatile. Not only had Fernando cheated on Angelina many times throughout their relationship, but he had also started to become very violent towards her. In late 2022, Fernando would assault Angelina so badly in front of her two older children that he nearly killed her. And even though Angelina broke up with Fernando after this incident, they would get back together only a few months later, and at that point, Angelina would become pregnant with the twins, Misael and Marina. The baby girls arrived on August 31st, 2023, and they were happy and healthy. But as soon as Angelina and Fernando had brought the girls home from the hospital, Fernando began using drugs to help him stay awake for long periods of time and deal with the exhaustion of taking care of newborns. The couple also liked to go out partying regularly, and they would leave the children with somebody else. Both Angelina and Fernando were still very young, and they did not seem ready for the responsibilities of parenthood yet, even though at this point, they already had two older children. Angelina, however, was responsible when it came to her providing for her family. She always made sure that they were able to get by. She knew that after she had the twins, she needed to get back to work as soon as possible to support the family, and this was made even more urgent by the fact that Fernando didn't work. So Angelina went back to work only 4 weeks after giving birth to Misael and Marina. And while the two older children went to daycare during the day, the couple decided that Fernando would watch the twins, as he was home during the day anyways. This would prove to be a huge mistake. Now, taking care of twins can be exhausting, and many of Angelina's family members offered to help the couple out with the babies. But the parents always seemed to have excuses as to why they could not see Misael and Marina. Relatives would also try to FaceTime with them so that they could see the twins. However, they were met with more excuses, like the babies are sleeping, or someone else was watching them at the time. Something just did not seem right. Then, on October 4th, 2023, around 11 a.m., Houston police officers were called out to the family's home, which was located on Linden Creek Lane. A 911 call had come over regarding Misael and Marina. They had been found unresponsive in their crib. Fernando had been the only one home with the girls at the time, and he had immediately called emergency services after finding them not breathing. While on the phone with dispatch, Fernando had been given instructions on how to perform CPR, which he would later say he did attempt. When police did arrive to the home, they found both girls lying lifeless on the sofa. They both had discoloration to their skin, as well as multiple abrasions and contusions on their bodies. The bruising was primarily said to be on their tiny rib cages and their fragile little arms. Sadly, both Misael and Morena were pronounced dead at the scene at 11:22 on October 4th, 2023. When police spoke with Fernando to see what had happened, he told them that the night prior, on October 3rd, the girls had been very fussy. Fernando said that once he had put them in their crib, however, they both quieted down quickly and fell asleep. The next morning, on October 4th, Fernando told police that he had left the twins in his grandmother's care while he brought Angelina into work. But upon his arrival back home, Fernando found both Misael and Morena unresponsive in their crib, he claimed. He then called Angelina, and when she answered, he told her that the twins were not waking up. "They're not doing anything," he said. And shortly after that, the father called 911. When Angelina spoke with authorities, she told them that she had last seen her babies sleeping in their crib before she went to work. However, not wanting to disturb them, she hadn't woken them. Both parents, of course, were denying that they had done anything to hurt the 5-week-old baby girls. And they both tried to place the blame for the girls' deaths on the hospital where they had been born. Both parents claimed that Misael and Morena had never acted like normal babies ever since they had been brought home. So why didn't you bring them to the doctor to see what was going on? Fernando also said that their skin had looked weird when he was bathing them, likely alluding to the bruises on their tiny bodies and trying to come up with a cover story as to why they were even there in the first place. Fernando also tried to blame the couple's not even 1-year-old daughter for the injuries that were found on the twins. Until the autopsies of Misael and Morena were complete, nobody was arrested in connection with their deaths. After they had died, however, there had been x-rays taken of both the girls' bodies. One of the babies was found to have multiple fractures, including one to her left femur, ribs, and clavicle. These rib fractures were determined to not be consistent with chest compressions from CPR being performed. The other baby girl had similar injuries, as well as a frontal head fracture. Additionally, both of the twins were found to be malnourished and dehydrated, with one of them showing evidence of acute brain bleeding, while the other twin had suffered hemorrhaging of her brain and spinal cord, which was indicative of recent trauma. These injuries were likely caused due to shaking or direct blunt force trauma. The medical examiner who performed the autopsies on Misael and Morena said that their injuries looked to be a combination of old and new, some of them even being weeks old. Keep in mind, these babies are only 5 weeks old as it is. The twins' injuries were inflicted intentionally, not accidentally. And as the pathologist said, they should have been recognized immediately by the parents and treated. The pathologist also said that one of the twins' injuries was actually consistent with 3 separate events, and they had both likely been assaulted with or against a blunt object. The police were notified on April 18th that both Misael and Morena's deaths had been ruled homicides by blunt force trauma. So over 6 months after the twins had died, both 21-year-old Fernando and 21-year-old Angelina were placed under arrest. Both Angelina and Fernando were each charged with 2 counts of causing serious bodily injury to a child. 1 count was by commission and 1 by omission. Commission means actually committing the crime, and omission is neglecting them. Each of them received bonds in the amount of $750,000, and they were both held at the Harris County Jail. The couple had neglected to ensure Misael Morena's safety as well as supervision, and both parents failed to provide necessary medical attention as well as nourishment to their babies. Additionally, Angelina and Fernando were ordered not to have any contact with each other or any children, including their own. If the couple is found guilty, they could possibly receive life sentences, and there's a chance that more charges will later be added, like murder charges. However, this will be up to a grand jury to decide. Angelina would also admit to authorities that she had never brought her daughters to any of their newborn checkups after they were born. She also said that both Misael and Morena had been sick recently, but for some reason, neither she nor Fernando could be bothered to take them to the doctor. Just a week after her daughters had died, Angelina had actually started a GoFundMe account. Understandably, sympathizing with the parents, people had donated over $1,200 to help with the girls' funeral costs. But after allegations against Angelina and Fernando had come to light, the GoFundMe was shut down. There was also an incident in January of 2019 in which 17-year-old Angelina and Fernando were involved in what's said to be an accidental shooting of a 13-year-old. This happened at the same home where the girls had been found unresponsive. Even though this shooting was said to be accidental, a relative of the boy who had been shot said that they had later seen Fernando and Angelina bragging on social media about getting away with it. During the couple's first court appearance, they would both ask to have their bonds lowered. And Fernando was actually out on bond at the time of his arrest for a charge of possession of a controlled substance. During this hearing, Angelina also got very emotional and had an outburst at Fernando, saying,
I don't care, stop shushing me.
Calderon shouted from just a few seats behind Vega during this PC court appearance over the weekend, telling the magistrate that he was the last one with the kids.
I don't care. I don't care. You're making me look like I'm a bad person. I don't care. I was at work when they died.
I was at work when they fucking died. Okay, sure, Angelina, but they were also malnourished and dehydrated, which takes time. So, you had to have noticed that. Both parents are now being held on $1.5 million bonds, so they did not get the reduction at all. They got it doubled. The short lives of Misael and Marina were filled with unimaginable trauma that the 5-week-olds could not verbalize. Now, Angelina's family is split over whether they should support her or not. When the media tried to speak with relatives of Misael, Marina, and Angelina, one relative said it's God's will and didn't elaborate any further before shutting the door. And Angelina's sister said publicly, she's one of the best mothers I know, and she was at work when the babies died. How could she be the best mom you know? She was starving her babies. Angelina's sister said that later in the day when the girls had died, Angelina had exclaimed through tears, I don't know what he did to them. Misael and Marina's great-aunt, Sarah Calderon, believes that while her niece, Angelina, didn't physically hurt the girls herself, she should be held responsible for the other things that police found, like the fact that both babies were malnourished and dehydrated. Sarah also said that her niece deserves whatever is coming to her if the allegations are proven to be true. I don't care if you're blood or whatever, Sarah said. Those babies did not deserve to go through what they went through. Angelina's Aunt Sarah wants justice for the twins, and she doesn't believe that either she or the twins will ever be at peace until that happens. She also added, they were definitely loved. It was hard when they passed away. I couldn't believe it. I can't stop thinking about what they went through. Well, thank you for listening to Misael and Marina's story today. How is it that you can hurt and kill not only one baby, but 2 newborn babies? And also to neglect them for weeks prior? It's deplorable and disgusting. These poor baby girls' lives were filled with hurt and pain for almost the entire time that they were on this earth, and they and their family deserve justice. So if you do like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and turn on those notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is about 2 times every week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye.